Real
All
quick,
right.
Prodigy, because I know both me and you would pay attention to some world events more than some of the others on the podcast,
Yep.
for better or for worse. What do you think about the recent bank issues, specifically SVB and Signature Bank and Credit Suisse? Suisse.
Um, I'm very frustrated with the rapid, rapid level of aid and bailout that just instantly happens so quickly with the government as a whole. I mean, everybody's heard about some of the problems and the closure of Silicon Valley Bank. They were one of the top 20 largest banks in the country. I think they were somewhere in the teens. They weren't like top 10, but they were still
Yeah,
a big bank.
there were.
You
I
know,
mean, there were actually they weren't considered a big bank. They were only considered a larger bank recently, only because it's kind of going into like history, but it's because of the easing of the Dodd Frank.
hmm
Yeah, the Dodd Frank Act, because they basically eased up some of the restrictions on what would be considered a bank that cannot fail, and it used to be $50 billion, and they changed it to a quarter of a trillion dollars, and because basically, if you were before with this act in, if you were a bank above $50 billion, you had to have more oversight and stress testing from the federal government, and so the banks, specifically Silicon Valley Bank, and I think Signature Bank, and a few other banks, they rallied really hard or lobbied really hard to repeal that specific rule. And after they repealed that rule, that's what you can thank good old, former President Trump for this one. He repealed it, and those banks went from a little less than $50 million to Silicon Valley Bank went from 2019, I think, from a little less than 50 billion to a little less than 250 billion in a
yep.
matter of 5 years, less than 5 years, really. So,
With risky ass, shaky ass
well,
investments.
the problem is, hopefully, I wish Double Tank was on here because he could break down further. But the main problem was this: they bought a bunch of bonds, federal bonds,
Yep.
that were 10-year bonds or longer. And when you have the interest rates going up, that affects the bond market too.
Yep.
So when you have a certain bond that's like, say you bought like a $10 bond at a certain interest rate, well, you're getting a certain interest rate for 10 years. It's pretty solid. Like you're going to get your investment back with interest, obviously. But what happened was when they kept upping the rates, that ups the fucking interest rates on those same bonds. So the bonds that you previously just bought for I'll say $10, not a bunch of money, because then it gets you got to do math and shit. But now that $10 same $10 bond is worth more money than the bond that you bought when the interest rates were lower. And so what happened was Silicon Valley Bank, they put a bunch of money in these bonds, and so that when you put money in the bonds, it's no longer liquid. Like that's just locked for like 10+ years, however long the
Right.
bond lasts for. And so apparently a bunch of people like recognize this, and they were like, "Hey, Silicon Valley Bank isn't as liquid as it used to be. Let's start pulling our shit out because we're afraid that we won't be able to pull it out. And because we have Twitter now, a bunch of people and Silicon Valley Bank, a bunch of people are just like, oh hey, let's just pull out. So they all just did a bank run. They just started pulling shit out. And Silicon Valley Bank was known for taking semi-risky investments on younger people in Silicon Valley or in the tech industry in general that couldn't previously get funding. So they were really notoriously known for doing that, like taking what other banks wouldn't take on that risk for these sorts of loans. So yeah, it was a pretty shitty thing.
Yeah, you can't. Here's the thing. Even with the bonds, yes, there's some in good times. When the interest rates are low, you think that it's going to be a pretty solid investment. I get that, but you can't over invest in just that or have too many of your eggs in that basket. Here's the other thing too. It's not like it was a giant shock or surprise. They talked about raising interest rates for a long time prior to even doing it, and then they continued to talk about every quarter or so.
Yeah.
Hey, we're going to be raising interest rates. We're going to be raising interest rates. So, I don't have a whole lot of fucking sympathy for them in general. And then I even have less sympathy for how quickly, there was just this immediate influx of, well, we got to bail them out. We have to.
Yeah, and
We have.
especially like the lies that they were saying about it. Like they were saying, well, if we don't do this, people are going to be, you know, it's not just going to be a haircut. It's going to be, mom and pop shops are going to lose business. Regular people are going to lose, their savings. And it's like, no, because the FDIC already insures $250,000 for that bank. Most banks are FDIC insured. So I think if you have more than, $250,000 in your account, you're pretty well off, given the fact that the average American only has $5,300 in their account.
Yeah, and
And,
yeah, even that's getting rarer and rarer to have 1,500. But I was going to say too, and you're absolutely right about the 250,000. You know that only the 250,000 is supposed to be insured. That's a well-known, not a secret, a well-known fact for anybody, especially in the financial sector or business sector or whatever. So you took risks, unnecessary risks. You could have diversified that. You could have had it in multiple accounts. You could have had it in multiple banks. You could have invested it here and there and real estate and a whole bunch of other shit. But you didn't do that.
yeah, just
So
just as kind of like a sort of extreme example, because Silicon Valley Bank, they obviously had accounts with businesses. Fucking Roku, they had almost $500 million in one account with SVB. Like, what the fuck? Like, how do you have almost $500 million liquid in a single account in a single bank? That doesn't make any goddamn sense.
you know what they were on? They were on that DuckTales Scrooge McDuck shit. They wanted to literally swim in the motherfucking gold coins. That's what they wanted to do.
Yeah,
You know.
man, that shit's crazy. Like, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the worst ones was Signature Bank. So I forget the guy's name. Frank. What's his first name? He was a former congressman. The guy who wrote the bill.
Oh,
Barney
Barney
Frank.
Frank.
Yeah, Barney
Yeah,
Frank. This is
yeah.
even kind of more egregious. So Barney Frank, he actually the guy that wrote the actual bill, he actually he stopped working for Congress and he actually ended up being on the board for, or he was a director, an outside director for Signature Bank, and he was getting paid millions of dollars from Signature Bank, which is the revolving door that everybody talks about, that people, which is one of the things that he kind of championed against, like large banks and shit. But anyway, he's on the board for Signature Bank, getting paid all this money, and he's one of the ones that lobbied to up the actual amount of what is considered a bank that cannot fail, which is supposed to be $250 billion instead of 500 billion. And he said that there was a slight bank run on Signature Bank, but that the Fed stepped in too soon and seized Signature Bank, and he was mad about that. But it's like, but I mean, man, you can't have it both ways. I mean, you're the one that wrote this bill, and you're also the one that lobbied against like this certain part of the bill.
Yep.
Like what I can understand. I can totally understand, even though it's early. I know that it's early, but I can totally understand. The federal government being, hey, we don't want 2008 all over again, especially given that we're still recovering from COVID. I get that, but at the same time, once again, you're using tax dollars to bail these banks out. And no matter, I don't care how somebody tries to fucking spin that shit, saying that, oh well, it's supposed to be covered by the okay. If it was covered by the because I know banks have reinsurance and shit like that. I understand that, but if the banks have reinsurance and this is all going to be covered by the banking system anyway, then why the fuck did the federal government step in? If the federal government steps in, that means our tax dollars are being spent on some level.
And what incentive do you have to be a prudent bank that
Yeah,
follows the rules, that doesn't overinvest in risky stuff, that tries to, uh, slowly and conservatively grow the money in diversified assets and all of these other things that are tried and true principles of economics and everything? There's no incentive to do that. It's be as risky as you can, be as reckless as you can, and it's almost like you're out here just fucking hoes with no condoms on. You know what I mean? And then complaining about getting some STD or STI. It's wild to me. It is offensive in terms of the whole bailout stuff, the 08, 09 stuff. A lot of people still don't even go back into that recent history and realize just how much that cost the average taxpayer. It was ugly, and at the same time, I want more regulation in terms of that revolving door that Kronos spoke about. I want more regulation in terms of truly evaluating, hey, is this bank at risk? Not a few weeks ago, everything looked all kosher. Like you had, what was his name? Jim Cramer on the show saying, oh, yeah, invest in Silicon Valley Bank looking like an asshole just at the end of late February. And now they're fucking gone. Like it's wild.
Yeah, and what another thing that's even more wild is that they literally paid out bonuses the Friday that they collapsed.
Yeah.
Like the Friday before they collapsed.
Yep.
So they're paying out millions of dollars to their, employees and their, senior and their executives, and all of a sudden no. You need to go back and recoup that money. Go back and take those fucking bonuses back because that's people's money.
Yep.
Now, I don't know if people understand how banks work, but when you give them money, like your money is what makes the bank work. Like they take that shit, they reinvest it, they pay themselves out. That's how banks work. But to have them do that and then be like, oh, I guess we failed. No, like if you failed, then it's more than just, oh, I guess all the senior staff is fired. No, take the bonuses back and put that into the people's bank accounts, and the other, the corporation's bank accounts. Because I understand that there's more than just people's bank accounts, but yeah, it's just it's crazy, and it's crazy that this is just an acceptable route for our tax dollars to take is to bail out these banks, and meanwhile we have to fight fucking. I'll just give an example like recent shit. The East Palestine disaster.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically it's like a mini Chernobyl, and it's been going on for weeks now, if not months. And they're getting very little federal aid. People are trying to tell them that, oh, the water's safe, even though people are getting rashes. They're saying the air's safe. People are getting rashes, they're getting sick, they're getting migraines and shit like that. There's already serious health issues with that place, and Norfolk Southern is saying that everything is fine, and that the people that they paid to take these samples are saying that it's fine. Meanwhile, the FEMA didn't really get involved at all, and the federal government isn't doing shit, but they're willing to back a bank where people's money was already fucking safe, that already had reinsurance. It's like, why don't you help the people out that are literally sick and dying? These people that had their money in that bank that had more than $250,000, they're fucking fine. They're fine.
And I'm going to put some numbers behind this for context. 150 billion in bailout money for Silicon Valley Bank, 70 billion in bailout for. Hold on, so sorry.
Signature Bank.
Yeah, for Signature Bank. Give me 1 second. I just
Credit Suisse isn't our problem because that was done by the. Is it Norway or the Swiss bank? It's a Swiss bank. So
yeah, but I was just going to say, I mean, again, this is context. Regardless of how you feel about any of these other things, roughly, this is an estimate, about 24 billion for student loan forgiveness, about 85 billion for repairing school infrastructure, about 20 billion for paid family leave, 40 billion for child and universal pre-K, 24 billion for dental coverage for seniors, 22 billion for 2 years free community college. I want to make this point, and I want to make it really clearly. When you're talking about all of this money, and it's in the billions and billions of dollars, the stuff that you always hear, oh, that's too expensive, we can't pay for that as a country. The dollars actually show that you just don't. There's no political will. That's fine. And I'd rather have that discussion about political will than blowing smoke and talking about, oh, we can't afford it. Get the fuck out of here.
No, it's because for some reason, both Democrats and Republicans, they believe in corporate socialism, but the people just pull yourselves up by your bootstraps.
Yeah.
We've had so much corporate socialism in this fucking country over the past fucking forever. That it's crazy. Like if we would stop giving all these goddamn incentives to corporations and stop with the subsidies and actually put our minds and money towards using our own money to help ourselves out, I think we'd be a much, much better off country. But people hear that the magical S word, socialism, and they get all fucking up in arms about it. It's like, listen, some of the greatest programs in America are considered socialist programs. Like
Correct.
they are. And I don't think socialism is like. I'm not a real big socialist, but when it comes to certain social programs, like what the fuck, fucking free schools for kids, that's a socialist thing, there's a bunch of like Social Security shit. It's in the fucking name. Like, who's against Social Security? Like, what person in America is against Social Security? It's something you pay. But people are trying to convince you to not be into it, but it's the money
Yeah.
that you paid into, so you can fucking retire. You know, or you can be like France and up the age and like watch your whole fucking country burn down. But, you know, there's a whole bunch of just getting around town. These are social programs that do that. Your tax dollars go towards infrastructure. You know, that's roads, electricity, fucking gas, all this other stuff. You know, libraries, shit like that. Who's against libraries? You know,
Yeah.
but all of a sudden, when it comes to expanding to new social programs, everybody's pissed about it. And it's like, but meanwhile, they're fine with like wasting it on bullshit.
Yeah. And here's the other thing that's so funny to me. Almost any nonpartisan, institute will confirm the fact that there's always positive ROI long term on infrastructure shit.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just always building new bridges, buildings, high speed internet, any type of infrastructure. It pays for itself in somewhere in the next 5 to 10 to 15 years, and then some in terms of the ROI. It's crazy to be against it. Anyway, this country.
Yeah. It's great, but also kind of terrible.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we're doing our best, in air quotes, if you're not watching the live stream. Doing our best, air quotes.
Yeah. And you mentioned France. Oh,